I went down, you know, I took your open house,
people who took to the streets of Berlin last Saturday was the biggest protest in Germany in a generation. Stop TTIP. We are also here today in solidarity with the people who have marched in their thousands from France, from Italy and from Spain to converge on Brussels in massive anti-austerity marches. We are also here today in solidarity with the people in the No TTIP camp, which has been happening all week in Brussels, with seminars, debates, people's assemblies and protests taking place across the city all week. And we are here today with yet another, in solidarity with yet another protest, this time in Brussels, which is happening today as we speak. So, the TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. It is not alone. It stands together with a tsunami of corporate alphabet soup that is engulfing the world and sweeping aside the very idea of what we understand as democracy. It is the end of a phase of 150 years of parliamentary democracy and struggles of the European peoples. It is the idea that we should now, in the interest of free trade, in the interest of business and in the freedom of capital, elevate corporations to the status of sovereign nation states, so that no longer will corporations be bound by the values of the people in democratic societies. You see, what we believe, the people here today, and the people in Brussels, and the people protesting all over Europe, we believe that the rules and regulations governing the economic interactions between people and corporations should be dictated by the values of the people in a democratic society. There are others, including Fine Gael, Labour, and the European Commission, who do not believe that. The purpose of the TTIP, the CETA and the TISA is to elevate corporations to the status of a sovereign state so that they can bypass the national and international courts, and they will be able to sue governments directly in a private arbitration to get compensation for all future imagined unearned profits as a result of our rules and regulations stymieing their profit. We have examples of this, people. We have examples of a company that operates in this city, Veolia. Veolia that runs 50% of the Lewis. They've got a 20-year contract to run over 20 sewage treatment plants around the country, and they operate in Egypt. Back a few years ago we had the Arab Spring, and the people of Egypt took to the streets. It wasn't just to get rid of the pro-Western dictator Mubarak, it was to get an increase in the minimum wage. Last year the government of Egypt said, let's give the people a minimum wage. They had a democratic revolution for that purpose. Veolia had other ideas, and they wanted the Egyptian government to compensate them to the tune of $1,300,000 for all the money it was going to cost them to pay their workers a minimum wage in perpetuity into the future. The Egyptian government buckled at the minimum €4 million cost of this arbitration, and nobody in Egypt got a minimum wage rise. That is what we're looking at, and that is what the government of Ireland, what the corporations and the Commission are intending to do. The other thing about TTIP is not just a free trade agreement, it's a free investment agreement. And the idea is that it will become illegal for the state to operate public service monopolies. It will be illegal not to privatise all public services. They say, oh well, no, public services are protected. Public services are protected. Don't worry. If you actually read the words in their press releases and the words that come out of their mouths at press conferences, it's quite clear what they're talking about is non-economic services. A non-economic service is a public service for which no fee is paid by the end user at any point. We've got our children in schools and we buy them school books. Schools are not a non-economic service and will be liable to the full rigour of the free market. They now want us to pay for water. Now that is now going to be in the free market as well, and we pay €100 when we get to the doors injured of our accident and emergency and hospitals, and that is it as well. We also won't be able to ban fracking. We've got a situation as well where here in Europe we use a thing called the precautionary principle. What that means is that we get our scientists together and based on the available science and research they say, let's take a precautionary approach to this possibly cancer-causing chemical. And the result is, folks, cosmetics, Even cosmetics are going to be affected by these free trade agreements. Here in Europe, we ban 1,328 chemicals from cosmetics because they're endocrine disruptors, because they cause cancer, because they kill human beings. Over in America, they ban 12. This is the reason that they want to harmonise and recognise each other's regulations. And so the idea of these free trade agreements is, oh, there's all this red tape between America and Europe. Oh, people have to test product twice. We can't have people testing a product twice. But I think the recent situation with Volkswagen, where they deliberately put a mechanism in the engine of cars that only switched on when the car could realise that the environmental protection people were testing the emissions, and then it would switch on and fake the emissions that were coming out of the car. And this is the level of subterfuge and, well, manslaughter that the car corporations are absolutely key to building and driving the EU Commission agenda. The EU Commission didn't just say we're going to take on board the interest of the car industry. They wrote to the car industry and said, please tell us what you want and we will put that in our negotiating. They only want to have one test, and I think we saw with this business of the Volkswagen corrupt engines that we need as many tests as we can. We also have situations where the American company would say, that cargo boat full of wheat, that's regular wheat, there's no need to test that. And then our people from Europe go and test it, and it's GMO. We need to be able to maintain the right in democratic societies here in Europe and both in America as well, to be able to test the products and, that are coming into our country. We have 20 years of examples of what happened with the North American Free Trade Agreement. 20 years ago, the very same trade unions and environmental groups that were campaigning against the NAFTA are still there today campaigning against the TTIP. And everything they said that would happen as a result of the NAFTA has come true. Over 1 million jobs lost, over 40% of farmers wiped out, and a 260% increase in food imports into America because they've moved production down to Mexico, where wages, pay and conditions are lower and where chemicals are much more readily applied. It's not just the TTIP. There's another one called CETA. Now you think it might stand for the Canada-Europe Trade Agreement because it's between Europe and Canada, but it doesn't. It stands for the Comprehensive Economic Free Trade Agreement. That is done. It is dusted. It is translated into the various European languages, and it has an ISDS, an Investor-State Dispute Settlement, a private arbitration panel which allows foreign companies to bypass the Irish and European courts and to sue governments directly for imagined lost profits in the future as a result of rules and regulations that we impose on corporations in order for them to behave in a fashion that dovetails with the values of our people. So the Canadian, the CETA, the EU-Canada Free Trade Deal, the European Parliament is going to try and vote on this next year. And if they vote with a simple majority, and if the 28 trade ministers vote with a qualified majority, according to the Commission, it will become law and there will be no votes in any of the 28 member state parliaments. There's another agreement as well, it's the EU-Korea Free Trade Agreement, and it's signed, sealed and delivered. And then we have another one called TISA, which is the Trade and Services Agreement. And this is a cracker altogether, because the idea is that they're going to liberate the entrepreneurial spirit of workers all over the world so that in the future you will be able to travel from Guatemala, China, Albania, come to Ireland and work for a contract cleaner cleaning the subcontractor cleaning the Mater Hospital. But don't worry, because Irish labour rights and labour legislation will not be available to you, and the labour courts will not be available to you. And the idea is that non-EU workers working in the EU will only have recourse to the workers' rights that are from their own home country, be that China or Guatemala or wherever. This is not some idle, fanciful thing that may happen in the future. It's already happening, and it's happening to the people of Australia because China and Australia have finished a free trade agreement. And they are about to vote on it in the next few weeks in the Australian Parliament. And the deal is that if you're a Chinese company, you've got an operation in China, and you've got an operation in Australia, and you employ a Chinese person in Australia, that Chinese person has no recourse to labour legislation, workers' protection or the labour court in Australia, and will work only under Chinese labour rights. When the Australian trade unions came out and campaigned against it, the government spent 28 million Australian dollars calling them racists and calling them guilty of economic treason. This is the kind of garbage that's going to come from the Dáil, and it's going to come from the European Commission as these free trade agreements get closer and closer. But anyway, today, as I say, we're here in solidarity with the protests and marches that are happening all over Europe against TTIP, austerity, and also in solidarity with the People's Debt Assembly that's taking place in Brussels as well. So, do we have another speaker lined up? Coming along? Anybody want to speak to next? Suffice to say that with 250,000 people in the streets of Berlin, with 3,200,000 people signing a petition against TTIP online, with all of you guys here today, we're going to educate ourselves, we're going to educate our